it up, even though we spent like about 30 minutes on that talk. And we still got like a few things to talk about. But why don't we talk about some of the events, since we had one conclude, which was Overwatch Contenders, and then we've got Apex Season 3 that's wrapping up very, very soon here. But Overwatch Contenders finished up. Obviously, ZP, you were part of the casting and production of team or side of things. And then Jake, obviously you played in the playoffs too. So why don't we start with EU? So EU United ended up winning. In EU, ended up defeating 1-2-3 actually in the finals. And I mean, I guess I kind of trying to move through this a little bit quicker than just our previous segments. Anything worth noting about the EU that you guys want to talk about?
I'd say a few things. One is
Okay.
that United is definitely remarkably solid, and two is that EU is interesting. I feel like a lot of the teams right now have pretty glaring weaknesses. You and the level of play in EU right now is not as consistent as I think you're seeing in counterpart regions. Where I mean, this is unpopular opinion, man. Where some people go, "Wait, what are you talking about? I thought EU was stronger than NA." And actually, I think one of the things that came out there is that while I think United would give a good fight to a lot of the teams in NA, I don't think they would beat Immortals right now. And taking a look here, it's just I don't know. There's a sloppy play coming out there, so it felt like somewhat rough showing for EU in the sense where a lot of teams weren't quite as organized as you would have expected coming in.
Felt like 1-2-3 lost. Not that United won, honestly.
Really? Okay.
I mean, all right.
I mean, I
I
thought
shouldn't say
United
that.
played
That's
well,
like
so
definitely
that's a
more than
little
I mean.
mid.
Like
you
they played good Overwatch. Like they outplayed them and they deserve the win.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, but like you just watch like Korean teams play, and they're not making these kind of mistakes. So the question has to be asked. I mean, and this is true even comparing to stuff like NA. I mean, there's some teams like Immortals that have, I think, really recently shown that maybe there is potential in NA to sort of compete with the sort of hyper-focused, hyper-organized style in Korea. But I haven't seen anything in EU that makes me think that that's like that same level of skill and competitiveness is gonna come out of that region, at least currently. Although teams like 1-2-3 just burst onto the scene from absolutely nowhere.
And that was
so
Yeah, no,
to me, like there's a ton of potential. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this is how it's gonna be and like EU sucks or whatever. But the status quo seems, not that NA is super great. Korea still seems to be the best region by a pretty fair margin.
Okay,
I do
sure.
think that EU is a little bit lagging behind, I guess. But maybe that's part of it is also think about how many quote unquote NA teams are European players that move to North America for sponsorship.
Right.
Sure.
So how much of it is
so
really just the sponsorship landscape, and how much of it is regions? I think it's probably more sponsorship, honestly.
You're hitting on a few points there. One is that there's been a brain drain in you to some extent, where like we did legitimately see some like cool standout stories of players like Mistakes definitely looked really cool, for example, for 1-2-3. And like there's good storylines and personal skill, but I'd say the name of it for Europe across the board, with the exception of probably EU and Laser Kittens when they were playing well, is that it did feel like coaching and coordination was somewhat lacking compared to where it should be. And part of that, I think, is if you take a look at it, is that there's not as much endemic org support in EU right now. A lot of the orgs did move to EU, or a lot of organizations put their resources in the NA more accurately. So it just felt like there was some flaws coming out where it's just like great personal skill is still abound, but there's just weirdness in the way that some of the matches came about in EU is the way I would say things there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I will say this is that it's a really good storyline for United, where United, they've been rewarded for being consistent for a long period of time, where they got over their second place curse, so to speak. They came out with a first place performance in a very high end major. So, I mean, it's really good for United, and all props to them. It was interesting watching EU there in some cases, particularly like you had games like the Bazooka Puppies 1-2-3 game where you just saw some weirdness.
That was a strange series, definitely. But I would say actually this was a success for 1-2-3 too. I mean, the whole point of Contenders, right, is to let people show like this be a proving grounds for folks. And I think more so on the EU side than NA, and partially because there are a lot more notable, I think, brands that we come to know in esports on the NA side. But with EU, there were a good number of teams that a lot of people didn't know anything about, and they got exposure, and the players themselves too. And 1-2-3 from the, like obviously on the final day, like performed really, really well compared to all the others. So, I think the EU side of things was like successful in terms of what it was trying to accomplish, contenders wise. All right, why don't we talk about NA? And obviously, Jake, you competed in the NA side of things. Immortal ended up winning, and they played well the entire tournament. I mean, when's the last time we said that about an NA tournament where we had a tournament span 6 weeks that one team just played great the entire time?
Are you just saying this to trigger Jake? Because you can
man,
basically
you don't
say
have to
that about
trigger me.
LGEvil and Carbon Series up until the finals. So wow, Chad, man, wow.
Well,
I'm not triggered by it. Immortals is the number one NA
it's-
team right now. I want to see them play against Rogue and Envy because those are the only two teams that can compete with them.
Yeah, it's so amazing because they've obviously made
Maybe.
some changes.
Who knows?
They made some changes recently. Like the changes were still pretty fresh going into Contenders, and so they've been able to get this ship righted very, very quickly with new pieces. And I mean, what we're seeing is like not only just a brand new Immortals, but potentially the top NA team, at least that's not playing in Korea. That we've seen, or just at least in the last month.
I really do think that a theme of Overwatch. So I would say like earlier phases of Overwatch were very much dominated by, in a sense, like DPS players got a lot of the glory, rightly or wrongly. I feel like we've definitely hit an era of Overwatch where tank and support play is truly paramount, and you have to look no further than how Immortals was able to evolve, where they made 2 replacements, where they got rid of Nomi, they got rid of Athan, and all respect to those players, but there was the perception that they were weaker and had like clear flaws for Immortals. And if you take a look at the results Immortals has had since making the changes, well, it's hard to argue with that perception. Immortals has been very dominant. They're able to be aggressive where they weren't able to be aggressive before. And sure, they're still backed up by great DPS play. I mean, you have Agilities just playing out of his mind every match. But when you look at the transformation, Agilities was still the same player when they had Nomi and Athan. It's after changing up their tanks and supports and getting much more cohesive engagements that actually were well supported, you saw a completely different side of the Immortals that, frankly, has been really difficult to stop for most teams in the scene.
Nomi was middle of pack Winston, or middle of the pack Reinhardt, not competitive on Winston. Athan was pretty good on Ana, middle of the pack again, I would say, and also not that competitive on Zen. Then you pick up Fate, who is, in my opinion, right now the best Winston playing in North America. Just watch him play. I mean, this he doesn't make mistakes. Less than any other Winston I've ever seen, at least, in the NA scene. So, it's a great pickup for the meta. I'll be interested to see how he plays on like Ryan, if Ryan ever comes back, or if maybe they just get a sub or something and put him in on Ryan. Who knows? Then you also look at Kareev, who could easily, is best Zen. And I mean, I'd say the competition is a little thicker for Zen, maybe. You've got players like Unko, you got players like Rolf, who are just insanely dominant on that character. But Kareev has shown that he is absolutely no slouch and is ready to play for that best Zen and NA title on any given day. So I think those pickups are insanely good for them. And those 2 characters, especially enabling a player like Agilities, who I think is also the best Genji in the West. He's much better Genji than me. Like I played against him a bunch of times. He's better than me. And, especially on that character, that's his best character, I think, probably better than Roadhog, especially with this much practice. So he's got that perfect combo of like Zen, Winston, Genji, all like, if not the best in the region, they are certainly competitive for that title. Then you have Grim Reality, who's no slouch on Tracer. Hyped is a very, very intelligent D.Va player. I think D.Va is a very good hero for Hyped. And then Verbo, again, a very talented Lucio that, the roster just has no cracks right now. I'll be interested to see how it goes, transitioning to new metas, especially if there's any communication issues with Korean players. But the fact that they have a Korean coach suggests to me that this could be a team that's going to be around for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, Immortals, the other thing that's worth noting here too, and you kind of touch on that, is that Immortals has a really good organization behind the scenes. They recently just revamped their organizational and coaching structure in the backlines. They got some very, very qualified people to come in, and they already had qualified people to begin with. So the brains behind the organization, they're very smart about how they handle things. So Immortals, they're going to be good for the foreseeable future. And I just wanted to touch on one thing here too, just to sort of supplant the previous point about tanks and supports, is that, and I'll throw this to Jake as well, but there's 2 examples I want to bring up here in terms of why it's so important right now. One is that you take a look at FNRGFE, where huge difference in their play when they didn't really have a great diva player of the level of Matt, and then they add in Matt. Like, it's a night and day difference where they suddenly go to a team that very easily could have made it to the finals with a few other things going their way. I mean, they're still newer. Then you take a look at, say, how LGEvil is playing, where LGEvil, you guys had a slump for a long time there, Jake, and I think a lot of the slump came from the part where you guys weren't comfortable playing dive to the maximum, whatever it was between Super and Rob 420. You guys, like, it wasn't quite there for a while, and then you guys did click and had a much better showing in the group stages of Contenders. So tanks and supports right now are just really incredibly important.
I'd say Winston's the hardest character to play in the current meta. Like, by far requires the most skill of any character. Like, the most, maybe not skill, because that's, you know, like Tracer's super hard, right? You can't really compare it. But yeah, decision making, making the wrong decision on Winston could instantly lose your team the fight, no matter what your team does. Like, your team could all pop off simultaneously, and you'll still lose if your Winston feeds. And the Winston making the right decision just lets you show up to the party, you know? And so it doesn't win you the game necessarily, but like, you definitely have no chance if your Winston isn't good. And on top of that, your Winston can make the right decision. And if your diva isn't making the right supporting decisions, protecting the Winston at the right times, but also peeling for the backline at the right times, you know, those characters are shining. I think, like you said, like, DPS characters have gotten a lot of love for a really long time. But I think partly that's because of the way the meta worked. You know, when you're running triple tank, like Genji, for instance, is a style I'd really like to play. And we were particularly good at, I would say, the triple tank meta on LG. Part of that is because you're playing Genji in that comp, you actually have like every cooldown on your entire team is like dedicated to making sure the Genji does well. Like, you have Zarya bubbles, you know, you have you're comboing dash resets on things that get hooked for free dash resets. You know, you're comboing shatters, you're taking every nano boost. You know, it's like you are getting everything. Like, it is like, if you're not going huge and getting team wipes, you're actually probably just losing the game for your team. Like, it's not enough just to do that. Like, the team wipes are an expectation.
There's a lot of pressure on that.
But now the Genji is like, not that the Genji is any less important or that skill is, you know, any less required, but you're not gonna, you know, if there's no grab, there's no nano, there's no there's no shatter, right? You're not going to see these like huge kill fees or like, oh my God, this Genji is insane. You know, if you get like a 4K, 5K on Genji now, it's impressive. Really impressive to me. Like, when I see that, I only see players like Agility's doing that. I see players like Shadowburn doing that because they're the best Genjis in the West. You know, it's like, it really does take that kind of skill to show that performance today. Whereas I think, honestly, he was overblown. I know I would sometimes watch cast and people would be like, wow, what a big play by Jake. I'm like, I actually just left click the grab like 6 times. That's not like, that doesn't make me good at the game. But now you see Genji's doing well. Now you know it means something in a much bigger way. Mm-hmm. And now, whereas previously, like, you know, a Reinhardt or, you know, even a Zarya was like probably not going to do huge things and get like a kill feed. But now, you know, the off tanks, your diva could get a triple bomb or a key boop or, you know, maybe more subtle plays that you don't see, like knocking a Winston out of a diva bubble or a Winston bubble. But they're, you know, just as game winning as something like a nano blade.
Yeah, I mean, the onus on getting frags is distributed a lot better now, and that's generally good for the game. There's a lot of DPS players that complain about that sort of thing, but at the same time, whiners. But overall, I think it's actually good for Overwatch to have that kind of distribution. Okay, well, why don't we move on to Apex Season 3, because there's a lot to talk about there. So why don't we start off with the Lunatic High AFB match, the semifinal match, before we get into the Emmy match. So Lunatic High ended up beating Africa Blue 4-0. Spoilers for any of the I should have warned you guys beforehand. But since
thanks for the.
It happened a week ago. Okay, like if you didn't watch it, then shoot, you're just not following esports at all. So all right. So anyways, they ended up dominating 4-0, and a lot of people were surprised at this, given that AFB was 15-0 coming into this match. So first off, before we talk about like maybe just the players individually, first off, was AFB like, did they just have a bad day in y'all's opinion, or you know, did they just have like much more of an easier path getting there? So the 15-0 was really misleading as to how good they were performing or who they've played.
I love that stat line. The 15-0 is really misleading.
I know.
It's just it's like go to FL game. The 42-0 is just misleading.
Yeah. So what do you guys think? Like, did AFB just play bad that day, or was it more Lunatic High just being incredibly awesome? Anybody? Just jump in.
I see Miro putting a little bit of that smackdown on Mano for talking a little bit too much.
So if we want to get into that,
I like that.
Okay, if we want to get into that, all right. So leading up to that, Mano had an interview where he basically was talking trash at Miro, saying that Miro's Winston, it's definitely not as good as mine, basically, right? And I don't know why people do this, okay? Like, why? Like, in any sports, I mean, why do you just poke the bear? Like, there's nothing that can be good from talking trash to another team, because all it ever does is motivate them. All it ever does.
This is not entirely true. I mean,
some people spaghetti when people are like talking smack about
but
them.
not
or
at
whatever,
this level. Come on.
But yeah, like
even at the highest
honestly,
level,
she's pretty childish to me, pretty jejune.
Look,
For
me, I'm not recommending people go on trash talk, but to say the idea that it doesn't affect people at the highest level is just outright wrong. There's plenty of examples, even in traditional sports, particularly like the NBA is a great example of players getting shit talk and just letting a player completely into their head.
No.
Sure. Can it backfire? No. Can you get to the idea of bulletin board material where it backfires and you get wrecked because now the guy's like special motivation? Sure, that can happen. But it's just a matter of like who you're talking shit to. There's plenty of instances of shit talk, and again, you just point to traditional sports here, of it getting to people's heads. And arguably, I mean, who knows how it went behind the scenes, but then there's the entire idea of like, did Michael's shit talk backfire versus C9? Like, Gardner still won. So like, right. I'm just saying, I don't think it's really fair to make a carte blanche statement that, oh, shit talk backfires, because there's definitely examples where that's not the case.
Okay, when you're talking about shit talking during a game, okay, if they were talking to each trash and trying to get in each other's head, like in the game, you could have comms across teams. Then that's one thing. Basketball, everybody knows Michael Jordan, just like the freaking craziest shit talker on the basketball court, and he was getting in people's heads all the time. Lots of people were doing that, like Mark Charles Barkley, whatever, right? But in terms of like beforehand on social media and things like that, the thing about shit talking somebody like Mono here is that if you shit talk somebody, he ends up winning, nothing comes from it. But if you shit talk somebody and you lose because they were super motivated to shut you down, that's when it's just like, why even say anything? Like, what's to be gained about saying anything there? So it's just like, I don't even understand it. And sure enough, we saw it. We saw that happen during that match. I mean,
sure, but that's just a case where you did not choose your opponent wisely for that. It's like, you probably don't want to, for example, to use the NFL, it's probably not a great idea to talk about how the Patriots are overrated or something before going into Foxborough. That hasn't worked out well for teams. But if you know that a player has a history of tilting off the face of the earth and otherwise, then maybe it's worth doing. Like, give an example here. I don't know if this would work or not, but if you wanted to take a gambit on a player in the NA scene right now, like deciding to have a little bit of pre-match banter with XQC, maybe that works out in your favor. I don't know. And I'm not saying it would. I'm just saying that, like, there's a possibility there that.
Stop revealing my strats.
See, now you're just motivating the Canadian team, ZV. What are you doing, man?
Well, something needs to motivate them, ChanManV. Something needs to motivate them.
Goodness.
Not fire. You're not wrong.
Oh, man. But anyways, the point is that Lina Sakai obviously had. I felt like, to me, that Miro and the team had added motivation, not only to beat AFB, but to shut Mono down too. And they did a great job of definitely isolating him, not necessarily killing him first, or really focusing on that way, but they totally negated the effectiveness of Mono. Mono is arguably the best, Winston right now. So Miro, Miro is definitely right up there too in that discussion. So, him just saying, Miro's Winston's, whatever, is definitely a slap in his face. But yeah, I don't know. What's y'all's take on that?
I mean, I think part of it is like, I know like OGN tries to like dramatize that, and that's sort of like what they want to some extent. And I don't know if that's like an edited interview. I think it's in OGN's interest to do things like that.
Oh, really?
I'm sure he said what he said, but maybe they amp it up a little bit. Maybe they remove a little teensy weensy bit of context. Who knows? I didn't see the clipping question, so I can't say for sure. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, it's the rare player that takes these things like a little too seriously and actually holds a grudge. Usually it's going to be something that you think about. Maybe if you think about it, during the match or before the match or something, while you prepare, maybe you're a little extra motivated. But I think in the long run, like if you're the type of player to like form grudges, then you're just not the type of player who has the right mindset to be the best of the best. Like you're just not going to get there, because if you're being distracted by something like what another player thinks about you, then you probably don't have what it takes in the first place.
I'll give you a counter argument. The greatest basketball player ever to play was a guy who held grudges. Like, was even calling out names during his Hall of Fame speech for whatever freaking crazy
Michael
reason,
Jordan was
okay?
a very petty man. Like,
I mean,
let's just be clear.
crazy. Okay, so this guy is the epitome of that type of person, and he's the greatest basketball player. So
I'm sure the physicality of sports probably makes it more relevant to like actually kind of hate people. Maybe that makes you more motivated or something. But being angry doesn't make you hit shots. Where it might make you like knock somebody over on the basketball court, and maybe that's actually a good thing.
Okay. Yeah, I know what you mean by that.
I will note here, by the way, just as sort of broader comment on shit talk and otherwise, that I do find one more interesting thing in esports, because you have segments of people are just like, I just wish everyone be good manner, GG's, well played, etc. Like, where's the sportsmanship? But generally speaking, it's the intrigue. Like, the way I would generally look is that you don't have dark without the light. I'm not saying that you go full Defran. Going full Defran is going too far, right? Never go full Defran. But like, there's something you said for having a little bit of a villainous persona from time to time, where like that very much gets people involved.
ZP, like we as people who do shows and pundits or whatnot, we love this stuff. We love being able to talk about this stuff. It's just, I'm just talking about the logic and rationale behind it, because it blows up a lot, and just look at the Warriors, right? Look at the Golden State Warriors this last year. I feel like they just said nothing the entire year. And last year, you had Draymond Green basically doing this type of, very, trash talk or whatever, or just, being very free with how he was very confident about things. And in some ways, I think it quietly blew up on him. And he had a little bit of a meltdown too last year. So there's other things too, but I don't think it helped them for sure, where they might have been able to finish it out if they just kept Cleveland down and just, in the dumps and not motivated them in any fashion. So for me personally, I just think that it's usually smarter just to shut up and perform than to, go and blast, because there's a chance that you're going to pay for it, even by embarrassment or just by motivating the other team.
Well, yeah, when it comes to risk reward, being villainous definitely carries a lot more risk for minor reward. Like, the minor reward is that, wow, sure, he backed up his talk. That's like plus 10%. The downside is, wow, you talked all the smack and you got right. That's like a negative 3,000%. So yeah, I mean, risk reward is definitely not in your favor, but it's also sports, any sort of competition in general. This is something that people like have fiery passion for. This is where oftentimes you don't get to become one of the best unless you think you're the best, and mentally you do disrespect your opponent somewhat. So that's what encourages people to come out with this stuff, but it also gives them the drama and intrigue. So,
but anyways, bringing it back to, I guess, just generally the whole matchup. So Lunatic Highs, man, they find that moment every single season to peak out at the right time, and obviously they're peaking out again in the playoffs, or at least at the end of groups and into the playoffs. So what do you think has been the biggest difference with them? They seem to all be in sync. Guido seems to fit in greatly now that Who Are Used, just completely out, and it's been a while now since he's played with them. So,
well, I mean, clearly the discipline of Who Are You and the swap up has worked out towards the end. I still need to deep dive and analyze some of the Apex stuff a little bit more deeply, like I've been catching up since being in Denver. But I mean, it's one of those things where anytime you make a roster move, there's the potential of it backfiring horrifically, but the coaches clearly knew what they were doing.
Okay, well, why don't we move on to the next matchup, which was Envy, obviously a lot of the favorite team, at least here in the West. So they ended up facing KDP again, but this time, actually Envy went into the match as a favorite by most. Even a lot of Korean analysts and coaches were feeling that Envy was going to beat KDP here. But it ended up being quite the opposite. KDP ended up winning 4-0, and I wouldn't say it wasn't like complete domination, even though it was 4-0. Like 3 out of the 4 maps I felt like were pretty close. There's only one map that was really, really bad, I think, for Envy. But overall, what do you think was the difference? If we were to get really deep dive into the specifics here, what was the big difference here?
I actually think I've heard a lot of complaints, I would say, from NA players in Apex, and I actually think that you should probably, maybe it's easy to look at those as like, oh well, they're just complaining because the Koreans are so good or whatever. But I'd say to give them a little bit more respect and credence than that. This is incredibly taxing on an NA team. Like, you just live in a hotel for like months. Like, the longer the tournament goes, the more like crappy you feel, the more like Taimu being burnt out. Like, I totally understand that, because I'm sure every player, regardless of whether they make a post about it, feels that way to some extent. Especially if you're living in a hotel in a foreign country, which you don't speak the language like whatsoever. Anytime you need to talk to somebody that's not like your teammates, you need a translator. Like, I mean, I could just imagine that being incredibly mentally taxing. Not that it's impossible to succeed, but if a Western team ever wins Apex, regardless of like what the rest of the competitive scene looks like, I'll honestly be surprised, just because of how like hostile an environment it is for an NA team, or for that matter, any non-Korean team. So I mean, I'm not that surprised, but
Apex.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Like just like the NA team doing well is like would be more impressive than just meaning that they're the best. Like I think you have to be better than you have to have more going for you than just being better than everyone else, but by a little margin. Like maybe where everything else perfectly situated, maybe you could just be 1% better and that would be enough. I think it takes more than that to win as a Western team at Apex.
Well, the one thing I'll say there is that living out of a hotel is definitely rough. I mean, even for Contenders, I was doing that there, and that's just casting where I don't have to, you have to watch VODs do team prep, but you don't have to worry about keeping mechanical skill up in a hotel room. So, I mean, living in a hotel is very tough. And one thing I'd note about Envy there, too, is that they've been on that grind for a really long time. I mean, effectively, their Apex grind, like, began a very long time ago when they were already on a grind before that with Atlantic Showdown, into E-League, into Korea, into more Korea. So, I mean, I don't know.
I hope they get a break. I really do after this. Like, just go and chill for a little bit, and then get those batteries recharged and come back.
I mean, the problem is with esports is that you can't really have that long of a break, especially in a time where, for example, Doomfist is about to come out. Metas are going to evolve. So if you're deciding we need a break to recharge and you're taking that break right as people are getting
at least go home.
New.
At least go home.
Going home is the big thing.
You can take a vacation. Like you can't. Maybe you don't take a month, but maybe you take a week or two. That that makes a big difference. A week to just not worry about stuff is like that matters a lot. I mean, I can say personal experience. LG actually just took our first break in 8 months as a roster, and it was like we took 3 days off, and I was like exhale, just like a lot of weight off my shoulders. I'm going back to scrimming tonight, but I just feel so much better than I did 4 days ago, because it just, you know what I mean? Like taking one off day a week for 8 months is pretty tiring. And then you just take a few days and you just relax. You still playing ranked, you're not totally out of the loop. You're playing some games, but you're not, exactly. Playing some Hearthstone, just having a swell time, streaming, that totally recharges your batteries. I mean, not totally, but it makes a big difference. And if you don't get that kind of break for month after month after month, it stacks up. That's what TimeManV said. And I think that's the way a lot of pro players feel. It's absolutely the way I feel. It's not as easy as it seems, I guess, to be a pro gamer.
Well, it definitely
the big thing I'd say for Envy is that if nothing else, even though they did not have a bad performance, I mean, certainly they got very deep into the playoffs. It probably would have been worth knowing that it might have been better for them to simply go on the NA circuit. Because, I mean, Envy does provide very nice apartments for their players. And they have a great setup where they have good apartments, a good working area, and they've barely gotten to use it effectively as they've been in Apex 24/7.
Okay, so I kind of want to get back to the actual match itself, and and I mean we're kind of alluding to them basically just fatiguing, and I think what we're saying is they didn't play up to their caliber of play that they could have played at, is what I'm at least pulling from this discussion. I mean, the fact of the matter is Envy belongs there. I mean, they should be playing these teams, and they should be trying to play to be the best player, in the world, not just NA. So, having them come back and just be on the NA circuit, not sure if that's right or wrong. It's always good to build your confidence and maybe, just win some tournaments if you are the favorite in doing that. But totally don't blame them for playing in that. They deserve to be here because they are one of the best teams. What I saw was just, I felt like KDP was more prepared. They seemed to be a little bit quicker, than just Envious that day. Bergring, I think, played just slightly, he definitely did play better than Effects, and we don't see that happen very much, even though those two are probably two of the best tracers in the world. But Bergring just seemed to make bigger plays at the right moment. Pulse Bomb is hitting Taimu at certain, just right moments, and that was the difference on a lot of these maps, just those type of plays. So it was close, and they could have very well, if one of Effects pulse bombs would have hit the right person, or Taimu just would have, it would have just missed Taimu on some of those pulse bombs, it would have gone a completely different way. So, the 4-0, I think there was a bit misleading.
Well,
It could have been closer for sure.
Look, in general, one thing that you're seeing a lot more in Overwatch overall, period, and you have to have this veil for any matchup that you're watching, is that it is a variable game. It's not a game where, unless there's a gigantic gap between teams, you can always have days where one team just literally comes out and is surprising and does more than expected. And I mean, it goes both ways too, right? Where, unfortunately, hate to mention it while he's on broadcast, but you take a look at a team like LGEvil, right? Where they put on
we choked.
Yeah, you put
Gotta
on
be
consistent performance for the entire group stages, and then you get to playoff day, and you guys, unfortunately for you, just kind of suck on that day, and, well, you don't go forward. But, I mean, that happens to teams. Like, LGEvil is actually a good example because you guys have had plenty of times where you put on a really good performance in group stages or otherwise, and then eventually you get to single limb and there's just one day where it goes bad. Or you have it in reverse where, like, for a monthly melee, you would have a bad group stage and then do really well on the playoff days. So, I mean, there is variability in the game.
Sure.
It varies from team to team. So
there's definitely variability, but I wouldn't say that ND like dropped off big time on that day. I mean, KDP, they did make some strategic changes too that were meant to throw off Envy a bit, like playing Widow like on attack on Hanamura just to move some of their characters around, or just to force certain positions on an Envious just part on one of Envious's favorite maps too. That was purposeful. Now, that was definitely strategic. Strategic move they made beforehand, and even a Somber pick. I think at the end of Route 66 was a super interesting pick too. That ended up, I think, costing Envy that map too. And I felt like that was something they decided beforehand too, on just the last point on Route 66 to maybe hack off certain med kits that Envious was using in the prior. But overall, I just felt like KDB was a bit more prepared and just on an up day. But I don't think MVS by far was on a bad day. I mean, they still played well. They just, if you want to win Apex, you have to have your A game like every time you go out there. And they probably just had their B game. And, that's unfortunate for them. But anyways, leading up to the end of this, kind of wrap it up, who do you think is going to win? Lunatic High or KDP? Which else? Yes. They're
Lunatic
both
High.
Yeah, I think going for LH here is probably the safer bet, although, again,
I think
given everything we just talked about, is that I'm not necessarily going to be surprised if it goes the other way around. So,
yeah, I would say leading into the semifinals, if you told me that Lunatic High and KDP were playing each other, absolutely pick Lunatic High. But looking at KDP after that performance against Envious, man, it's definitely a lot closer than I would think. But I think I'm going to still take Lunatic High here, just given that they've been there before too. They've been in the finals. This is the first finals that any Kungdu team has ever made it to, right? So this is a big moment for the organization and the team. All right. Well, anyways, when is the finals, by the way? Is it Tuesday or Friday? It's one of those days. I think they usually give them a week, right, to really prepare fully. So I have to look again at the schedule, but it's definitely sometime next week. Definitely check that out on twitch.tv/OGN Global when you get a chance. All right, we're actually at 90 minutes. Why don't we just go through maybe one or two questions real quick and then wrap up. Okay, so we got a question from Heron452. Something that's been on my mind as we talked about Overwatch League is... Hold on a second, I'm changing the title here. I'm trying to read and change the title. And the growth of esports in general is the accessibility of Overwatch is obviously incredibly demanding. Not only in terms of graphics and hardware, but also the internet connection. Unlike traditional sports, we don't have gyms and baseball fields that are publicly available. So a lot of people just don't have the money to even play Overwatch. In Korea, there's PC cafes that let people like Kaiser play Overwatch, but don't have that. They don't have that commonly here. Do you think that will hurt the growth of esports overall? Do you think that companies like Riot and Blizzard should invest in PC cafe-like businesses? Big fan of the show. Yeah, so what do you guys think? Should there be more, I guess, internet cafes and that have games that are readily available for people, PC bongs, I guess, essentially here in the U.S.?
I mean, that's already happening more on the collegiate level. Like, as you get more support for collegiate esports, one of the outcropping there is going to be that you're going to have more PC cafes, basically as support within college campuses. So that alone is going to add quite a bit to it. I think in terms of the idea of like PC cafes as a let's go there type of thing, it's a little bit difficult in the US in terms of price to like you have to charge high rates that a lot of people that would go don't necessarily have. Maybe in the future, but I think the future is just sort of. I think the college level for that is going to be pretty good.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Jake, what do you think, man?
I mean, I think the accessibility thing is, especially with Overwatch being on a console. I mean, I guess it's weird because you can't really play competitively on console. It doesn't. I mean, I don't know what they do, but it's not like legit. It's not like, I mean, like it's like you can't. It's always gonna be a problem because the fact of the matter is that you could just plug a keyboard and mouse in and you'd be better, which is like, you know, a pretty big problem for consoles, I would say, in terms of like competitive, because it's never going to be the highest level available because no matter how good you are, you just plug in a mouse and you'll become better as soon as you adapt to that, because it's just more precise, it's quicker. You know, the reasons are obvious. PC Master Race, but I think like I don't know if like PC bangs like that model is like exactly perfect for the States. But one thing I will say is that in terms of like internet connection and hardware, as Overwatch, I would say the rate of like this isn't Crisis. You know, like the rate of like PC requirements isn't like skyrocketing. You know, it's cool that I see a game like Overwatch that isn't all about, although it does have, you know, relatively high PC requirements, it's not all about let's get the best graphics possible, like photorealistic, just keep grinding on the graphics. You know, I think they did make some concessions to performance and to, you know, slightly older machines, although you're not going to run this game on a really, really old machine. You know, I myself got to top 500 in the first season when I was studying abroad in Europe on a MacBook Pro with Boot Camp. So, you know, you can do that. Like that's achievable. I mean, I was already like a professional or whatever playing TF2 at the highest level. So like, you know, I had the experience, I had like a knowledge advantage on people, but I never played the beta, you know, like I didn't have that huge of an advantage on people. So I think that, you know, a lot of the concerns people have are a little overblown. I think like the gains you get from having an insane top of the line, you know, state of the art setup compared to like barely running the game setup, the gains are real. Don't get me wrong, but they're not insurmountable.
I don't know. This is a case where I'll push back on that somewhat. I think that it's great that Overwatch is accessible, but the reality is that you have probably 97%, likely more of the player base that are simply at a technological disadvantage to the people that are playing in the high end. So, I mean, it depends what you want here. If you want people to enjoy your game, like Overwatch is well-coded, plenty of people can join the game. They don't have to be at the top level. But the reality is now we're at a point where you talk to most competitive players. They have at least a 144 hertz monitor. Most of them have Many of them, rather, have upgraded to 240. You have rigs that are able to get that level of FPS in the game to support it. And there's a very tangible difference in terms of tracking and how you play within the game to having those hardware advantages. So, I mean, that is sort of like the dirty little secret of Overwatch in the back, is that your top level players are generally playing with like much better equipment than your lower level players. But that said, I mean, the game is still very much accessible to get you that first taste so that you later on invest, I suppose.
Yeah, I would say that Train, like, you know, not thought of as like a weak Tracer player or something in North America. Train was on sub 100 FPS until like a week ago or 2 weeks ago or something. Crazy. So I really don't like, I mean, I'm absolutely, if you like, when you're a competitive player and the resources become available to you, you would pay like $1,000 for a 2% gain, like any day, because you're, you know, think the risk reward is like, it's insane, right? Like these orgs have the money. It's like, you know, they have the sponsors from the computer parts, but you know, it's like, it's not that hard, honestly. And, you know, maybe the gain's bigger than that. Maybe the gain's like 15%, 20%. But even that isn't insurmountable. You know, this isn't a 50% gain. It's not like some insane, like you just can't compete unless you have the perfect hardware. You know, like I think that's just sort of like a myth by, you know, perhaps the people who stand to profit. Like, you know, I think if you can just get the game, play PC, you know, like play Winston. Guess what? Like if you are very, very smart, very, very tactical.
I mean, are you making an argument against PC hardware? Are you making an argument against Winston?
No. I'm not making an argument against PC hardware. You know, I just think that it's
no, I know what you mean.
Not that it doesn't exist, not that there's no advantage.
I get what you're saying,
because that's false, but it's simply not true that you can't compete at the highest level without great hardware. You can't compete at the highest level with like totally trash hardware, but if you're getting like 60 frames, you can compete. You can be competitive. Maybe you can't be the best in the world without the best setup in the world. But
the
you can definitely get
that Overwatch, as people get better, is becoming much more on the margins, where 1% accuracy is literally the difference at times between winning a team fight cleanly and losing it horrifically. And better hardware very much helps in that. So, I mean, I think the point you're trying to make here is that you can get started in comp without the absolute best hardware, but I would say at the top end, you really do need to be competitive there.
You can certainly win enough money to buy the best hardware without the best hardware. That's 100%. That's just a fact. I won more money than you would need to buy a perfect PC with a crappy PC. Not a crappy PC. Mine was relatively nicer. But other players on my team, specifically Train, could have easily bought a much nicer PC with the money he earned playing on a PC that was like 8 years old or something.
Right. Yeah, and I would add the last bit as I think just culturally speaking, that PC bangs just I don't think they would work here in the U.S. You know, like Blizzard going out, Riot going out and investing in PC bangs. I don't think that would do that much, to be honest. Where the collegiate play is what ZP was talking about, I think is a much better place to really invest, and it's a much better attempt at something that can be successful too. You know, in the end, people have to make money. Like if you're going to open these PC banks and stuff, it has to make money. You know, and it's not going to make money if like literally the only game that you're trying to promote in these things are Blizzard games or just Riot games. In the U.S., like people play so many different games. So it would have to be like a full-out investment in all these type of games. And, we've seen with arcades and things like that, that's not a good business here in the U.S. So I don't see that ever happening. But
part of the appeal of arcades, and this is going way back when as a complete tangent, but arcades had the appeal that back in the day, you could get way better graphics than you could possibly get home, where you're sitting at home with the Super Nintendo and the arcade has the equivalent of like a souped-up N64. Like arcades were really cool. Eventually hit a point where just like arcades could not offer a graphically superior experience in many cases. I mean, now they're trying to get back there with like VR stuff, but it was more sort of arcades had to go down the road of, but do you have a steering wheel and something that vaguely looks like a vehicle? And that clearly wasn't as big of a selling point as better graphics.
Right. All right. Well, why don't we wrap up since Jake's got to get to scrims really, really soon, but thanks for coming on, Jake. I know it was last minute, given that we had a couple drop off last minute, so I really, really appreciate you coming on, given that we had some great discussions on Doomfist and all the events. Any shout outs you want to do before you get going?
Yeah, actually, so if you're interested, you can follow me on Twitter, which is at Jake_Overwatch. Overwatch is fully spelled out. But also, more importantly, if you're interested in such topics as Overwatch balance and game design, you should go over to check out mindgames.blog. That's all one word, mindgames.blog. And on that blog, I post, some pretty in-depth essays, I would say, examining things like the fundamentals of game design, how balance is conducted, and sort of give my opinion and my ideas on those as a professional player. And I'm always looking for more feedback. So if you leave a comment, I really appreciate that. Let me know what you think. Other than that, thanks so much for having me again. It's always a pleasure, ChanManV.
Yeah, those blog posts that he actually ended up making are really, really good. So definitely check that out, man. That's cool that you started doing them, because you just started maybe like a few weeks ago, right? Starting to post.
Yeah, it was about like a month ago or something. I was just like, I was like gonna write one piece, and the reaction was super positive, and I was like, there's so much I could talk about with this platform. Like, I just feel like the feedback presented to Blizzard is really like, even from the professional player base, is like pretty hard to sift through, honestly, and I can empathize with their difficulty working with it. But I just try to make more long form specific content in a really accessible format that's not like on the feedback for, or not like the feedback form where things sort of come and go. So this is our pro talk, pro feedback. I think it's a little bit better of a format, so hopefully it gets traction. Who knows? We'll see.
Okay, cool. ZP, want to do some shout outs?
Blog wise, I mean, I don't have much to shout out. I'll echo what Jake shouted out and just say, you can follow me at TempoZP on Twitter. I'm easy today.
All right, cool. And same here. You can follow me on at ChanManV on Twitter. You can find the VODs for the overview, as well as today's episode, which I'll post shortly after the show at youtube.com/ChanManV. You can find us on iTunes also by just searching for Overwatch or the overview, and you'll find us there, as well as Google Play and SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/ChanManV. You'll find us there too. But anything else to shout out? Oh, I'm doing a Streamer Showdown Hearthstone edition tomorrow at 2 p.m. If you guys are interested in Hearthstone, I know a lot of you guys like Streamer Showdown, at least the one we did with Overwatch.
Get me in on that, ChanManV.
They get you in on the Hearthstone one?
I'll pop up. I'll take over,
God,
man.
That'd be hilarious. No, but
it's
tomorrow
like now featuring random Overwatch guy.
we should have Overwatch people doing Hearthstone and Hearthstone people doing
I will.
Overwatch.
I'll enter into a Hearthstone tournament.
That would be so.
I'm ready.
Put
I'm
hacks
ready.
on your Hearthstone.
I gotta craft some cards. I gotta buy some packs to make competitive decks, but I'll do it.
That's not an event. It's like a game show. So it's just all your knowledge on the cards. That's all.
Oh, okay. I'll try. I think I got some good game knowledge. A little bit.
Yeah. So, anyways, you can check that out, guys, tomorrow on Tice's channel. It's gonna be Dog Tice. Tice, Jackie Chan, and hosted by Noxious, of course. Tice, THIJSHS, so twitch.tv/TiceHS. But that's going to be it, guys, for this week for the overview. So for Jake, ZP, and myself, ChanManV, we'll see you next week. Later, or next Tuesday. Not next week, not next Thursday, but next Tuesday. Later.
Smooth.